Hello, everyone. Welcome to Goucher Environmental Dialogues. I'm Dr. Jen DeRosa. I'm the director of the Environmental Sustainability and Management Program at Goucher College. And if you're just joining us for the first time, the Goucher Environmental Dialogues are a web-based speaker series, and we feature cultivated conversations with environmental, sustainability, and climate leaders, visionaries, and innovators. This series is hosted by Goucher College's master's degree program in environmental sustainability and management. And if you ever have questions about our master's degree and you are interested in learning more, we're actually hosting an information session on March 13th at 6 p.m. And my colleague Taylor will post the link to that in the chat later today, so you can take a look if you're interested. We'll also in the chat include our link tree so you can register for future Goucher Environmental Dialogues. You can learn more about the program. You can follow the recordings on social media and things like that in case you want to come back to it. But today, our conversation features is focused on community-supported agriculture and regenerative agriculture and tackling environmental injustices through farming. And our guest is Emma Jagoz. And Emma is a first-generation farmer. She's the founder of Moon Valley Farm, which is a community-based farm in Woodsboro, Maryland. She founded Moon Valley Farm in 2011 with the mission of providing bountiful, nutritious food to the Mid-Atlantic community. And she's done this while raising kids who she hopes will find as much purpose and meaning in the process of farming as she does. And the farm, which started as a 12 community-supported agriculture members and about a quarter of an acre under cultivation, has since grown to several hundred members and serving many local restaurants and organizations, and it's several acres now in size. So please join me by giving a warm welcome to Emma. And you can do this. I know it's weird in the webinar format because you can't really say or see yourself, but you can join me by giving her a welcome in the chat. And in the chat, you can also indicate maybe where you're joining us from. And also, we're going to use the chat for if you have any questions during my conversation with Emma today. You can always write them in the chat and I can give voice to them later on during our conversation. So with that being said, hello, Emma. Welcome on this snowy day. And so I understand you're a first-generation farmer. Can you tell me and our audience what led you to this career?
I'm glad to be here today. I never thought I would be a farmer when I grew up. I didn't even imagine it as a career choice as I grew up in the suburbs of Baltimore. Many of you from Goucher are familiar with the town I grew up in Cockeysville, Maryland. And so I went through high school and college as an American Studies and Women's Studies major, thinking that I would kind of go into a white collar position, to be honest. And when I graduated from college in 2008, there's a financial crisis going on throughout the world, and new graduates were not embraced with the open arms of the economy that maybe former generations were used to. And I decided that I wanted to continue my education of life skills by learning how to cook at a restaurant because I felt like that was one of the life skills that I had ignored so far in my young age. And long story short, I worked at restaurants and got married and pregnant as a sort of alternative at the time. And through my pregnancy, I became really, really involved in and interested in how my diet affects my physical health and the growth of my baby. And one of the topics that really inspired me was the week that I read in What to Expect When You're Expecting about how my baby's brain was developing and how your diet should include DHA-rich foods. And so I was voraciously interested in fueling my baby's brain. I thought that was a super important and unique opportunity to build a robust brain on this kid. And so arugula was one of those DHA heavy foods, and I blew my grocery budget actually by buying so much local and organic arugula. And one of my girlfriends suggested that I actually grow my own, and I decided to start a garden on my apartment balcony. And I got involved in looking at these seed catalogs, and they had so many varieties of produce that I had never heard of before, just different colors, shapes, sizes, and totally new foods than what I was used to, that I just became so excited about those, and tried varieties of things that I had never heard of before. And so my apartment balcony became pretty robust, and I was absolutely sold when I started to taste these foods and felt that they were just so much more flavorful and nutritious than the foods I was finding at the grocery store. That when I had my first child and then my second 16 months later, I really wanted to expand on my new hobby to offer these foods to other families that I knew in my community were also craving both food they could trust, also unique foods, and the high nutritional value of foods that were just freshly harvested instead of shipped across the country. So it was with that passion for food and nutrition of myself and my family that really led me to start my own farm.
Awesome. I love that story. It's really what sort of starts as a personal passion and then develops into really a calling. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I agree with you. The food that's grown, especially in a garden, I mean, I don't have a farm, but in a garden definitely has a better flavor than what you're finding at the store. Um, Now, I know in a title of our talk today, it's community supported agriculture. So can you, for those who aren't familiar with this term, can you explain what community supported agriculture is and how it works?
Absolutely. Community supported agriculture takes many different forms. So I'll first just start with the form that my farm started with, and that it started with as a concept, which is individuals directly purchasing a portion of the harvest from the farmer. And oftentimes this is an advance purchase. Sometimes the individuals pay, say by February in the calendar year, and start receiving boxes when the harvest start, maybe in May. The evolution of CSA has happened on my farm, so most of my members are paying by the week now. But the core value is there, that we are financially dependent on a core group of individuals who are directly supporting my farm. My farm has grown to 70 acres and well over 1,000 members over the past 14, 15 years of our existence. And so what has been able to happen for my farm is that the more direct support I've gotten from individuals, the more that I've been able to grow my farm and my impact in the community. So people directly supporting, and then we share the harvest. An inherent part of community supported agriculture farm is that the individuals are traditionally sharing in the risk and reward of the farm's success or failures that season, or challenges, if you will. So if there is a crop loss on, say, winter squash, you may not receive the winter squash that season. A lot of farms have innovated to improve the consistency of the harvest by partnering with other farms to develop some redundancy in their crop plans to mitigate this risk a little bit. And some farms are a single source farm. And so what what the farm produces is what the individual gets. So there's many different models. Our CSA model today is sort of the pinnacle of flexibility. Our customers can put their boxes on hold. Our program runs year round. Consumers can get add-on subscriptions from partner farms that we have. So you can get a weekly dozen eggs or box of fruit or sourdough bread. You can also swap items in the box to customize your share if you don't like certain crops that we're growing and harvesting, or if you have certain allergies in your family. And other models are sort of get what you get, don't get upset, which is just, you get a portion of the harvest and it's not customizable. So there's many different iterations of and models for CSA as farms have found what's best for them and their community members.
Okay, yeah, thanks for explaining the different models. That helps me to picture it better. How would you say, I mean, in terms of our focus on sustainability, how would you say that the community-supported agriculture model fits into that bigger vision of a sustainable food system?
I think the CSA model should be the core of a re-envisioned food system that centers around, I hate to say diversity, equity, and inclusion these couple of weeks, but I do feel like that's a really powerful, and it needs to be the basis of a re-envisioned food system in which people are able to access healthy food at affordable prices, and that the farmers are stewarding the environment and cleaning up our waterways and are part of regenerating soils for the future, as well as making a profit right now. So I do think that by engaging directly with customers, we're able to consumers are so much more educated because we're in constant communication with them about what the challenges that we're facing mean for our operation, and we're able to also directly get solutions from our community, because our community is extremely diverse in terms of their strengths, their careers, their connections, and also we have direct access to sometimes financial opportunities with a CSA program. So like I mentioned before, in the traditional CSA model, a lot of consumers are paying upfront. There have been a lot of creative solutions that come out of CSA programs that such as a 5-year CSA payment to help farmers access land and secure land as first generation farmers, those who don't have the capital to seek a traditional loan on that important investment. But I do think that a really sustainable food system has to include that direct engagement and that direct connection with the farm, because the food tastes better because it's more nutritious, and we're able to also develop a resilient system by decreasing all of the steps that if you're thinking about the food system that we have today that's relying on Mexican and California grown food, there's a lot of steps, a lot of hands in the way in between the farmer and the consumer, and there's so many fewer steps, especially when it's just the farm directly to the consumer. There's really no middleman in that. So the more that we can cultivate that as a base of individuals' diets, the more power we have to make fast and important changes when we need to make them, in good times and bad.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense, because I'm also thinking too, when you bypass all of those steps, you're reducing the amount of emissions associated with the entire process because it's not being transported. And yeah, and in general, you're allowing that nutrition to reach people that maybe prior did not have as easy access to it. So thank you. It makes sense. You also emphasize, I know on your website and in your bio, regenerative agriculture as a key part of your farming practices. Can you explain how regenerative agriculture, how those methods work, and what are the benefits?
Moon Valley Farm is a certified organic farm, and I believe that organic is a key part of a regenerative profile. So organic farming is inherently saying that we need to promote biodiversity on the farm. Promoting biodiversity can look like providing habitat for snakes, bats, birds, insects, pollinators, and this is through our tree planting, creating brush areas, erecting bird houses and bat shelters, and then otherwise investing in the long-term fertility of the land. So regenerative is inherently that. So farming can be extractive, right? We are saying that, I mean, this proposal is that humanity is getting its energy from the soil, from soil grown foods that we produce, and we're taking it so that we can survive. And without being purposeful, will be extractive. So a lot of conventional ag, if you will, is and conventional agriculture can mean a lot of different things. It's a big spectrum, but conventional agriculture can be inherently extractive, which is saying I'm focused on growing the most food out of all of this land that I have. So if I have 100 acres, I'm going to grow food on 100 acres, and I'm going to put exactly the fertility required for this harvest, and I'm going to harvest that and take it out of the soil and eat it. And so if you're taking 100 acres and you're growing food on 100% of it, you're not allowing for a lot of those things that I mentioned before. You're not allowing for wildflower meadows. You're not planting trees that bees need early or late in the season in order to forage and stay alive to pollinate those crops that you may be producing on that 100 acres. You're not able to dedicate land for cover cropping, which is essentially producing your own fertility as well as encouraging biodiversity in terms of crop production on your farm. So in some ways, regenerative is saying that there is a cost of producing food, and that cost, we're going to mitigate it purposefully through our strategies. And we're also going to take some of the land that we have available and take it out of production to give back to it. So one of the real challenges with regenerative agriculture, especially as a first generation farmer who's paying for my land for the first time, it's not already a part of the generational wealth that I've inherited, that you cannot maximize it for this year's harvest, essentially. So regenerative ag is inherently, sometimes I liken it to somebody's financial portfolio. You have to have room for short-term gains, but you also really have to have that bucket for the long term. And it's really hard to have capacity to invest in that if you don't have enough support. And that's why I think having that direct community support can be really helpful, because if we prioritize our sales channels to be many steps removed, a lot of times it's much harder to have those conversations with the end user to say, hey, we're having some problems and we need to raise our prices in order to continue to prioritize our long-term investments, as an example.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that analogy to help kind of visualize it in terms of the really regenerative agriculture has got a vision for the long haul in terms of not just short term. And I imagine, I mean, going from your garden to your first farm and then scaling it up, you've probably learned a lot through just the experience of doing this. So, what have been maybe the most transformative lessons in scaling your operation to serve an entire community versus just like food for yourself?
There have been so many. Yeah, because I have farmed, like I said, for about 14 or so years on borrowed land. For 8 years, I was borrowing 6 different parcels before I was able to afford land of my own. So there have been a lot. I think one core lesson is that in order to grow a business, and specifically a business that is serving a community, you have to grow yourself as a leader, and be aware that some of your shortcomings may be the bottleneck of your operation if you don't address those in order to scale. And 2, you really need to have an open and honest feedback loop with your community, because they are going to have some of the best ideas for the development of your organization. So my community has been responsible for basically handing me some of the best ideas for our growth and success. And if I wasn't available to accept them, or if I was defensive about them instead of open-minded, it would have been a lost opportunity. So really making sure that I have continued to develop those feedback channels with my community, and as well as really improve as a farmer myself, and make sure that my tactics are both in accordance with my values as an organic farmer, as well as prioritizing efficiency, so that I have the capacity to be there to be available to my customers.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. And I'm just imagining a massive amount of just learning on the job that you've done in the last several years. Can you describe maybe 1 or 2 of your biggest challenges that you faced and how you overcame it?
Yeah, the one that consistently comes to mind is the weather. And I'll say the weather in 2018. In 2018, we were on track, and I hope you all aren't numb to some of the words I'm going to use, but on track to be the hottest and driest year on record, until we became the wettest year on record in a 1-week turnaround. So in July, and the 3rd week in July, and as a farmer, July is a time when we have some of the most sales. We call it the hot and heavy season, because all of the produce is heavy. It weighs a lot. It's tomatoes, zucchini, potatoes, that kind of thing. And we're also having to start all of our seeds for our fall and winter harvests. That's the right time to capture the daylight and the growing degree days that we need in order to sow seeds in time. And when our cool weather crops are going in, it's very hard to get them established in excessive heat and dry conditions. It's hard to get enough water on there without the water just straight up evaporating on us. So that was really challenging. And then we also received so much rain that it left some of those soils that we had exposed to erosion and to washing our seeds and new plantings away. It had left our some of our main crops of winter squash and sweet potatoes susceptible to rotting because of how much moisture was in the soil, and it was just standing water, as well as food safety concerns for a lot of our leafy greens that were in the field. So many farmers that fall ended their CSA programs early because of the devastating crop losses. And so that's when I faced a real choice as a business owner and a farmer. I too had faced many crop losses, and I was facing, what do I do? What do I tell my customers? Because in the CSA program, people were pre-committed and they had put their money out front for us. And we relied on that. And yet the money that we spent, in some cases was wasted because it rotted in the field. So what we decided to do is use some of our protected culture, our greenhouses and high tunnels, to produce a lot of really quick turnaround crops, such as microgreens, baby greens, radishes, and turnips, and continue to fill our program with those crops. So one of the takeaways that I had, or one of the lessons that I learned from that, and that's been shaping my business ever since, is to invest in as much protected culture and infrastructure as possible. And some of that infrastructure does include greenhouses, of which we have 10 now, but also cold storage, so that we could grow more storage crops to have in our coolers in times when our fields are decimated by crop conditions.
Sounds very resilient and very creative to addressing what I imagine is probably the frustration of almost every farmer in the world. Is just you don't know what the weather's going to be, and that's increasingly getting more and more difficult with climate change. So that actually brings me to my next question. Considering climate change and other environmental pressures that are occurring around the world, are there any other innovative techniques or practices that you've adopted at Moon Valley Farm that maybe you haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, so I've developed a 7-part climate resilient plan, actually. And so this is something that is a decision-making tool that we use at the farm to make sure that that the financial investments and the practices that we employ are working toward the same goal of developing our farm as climate resilient. Some of the parts of that I haven't mentioned yet is investing in tools and technology that will help us to use data to drive our decisions. So it's hard to tell an audience of people who are not farmers how radically wrong our short-term memories get about the seasonal pressures that we're under. But once it's super cold, like this past winter has been really cold, it's really hard for us to accurately remember how hot it was. And so we're using weather stations to help us detect new patterns that may emerge over time that have resulted from climate change. We were really at the start of my farm, I was relying on these decades and centuries old rules of thumb that farmers had developed that are just changed at this point. When the last frost is going to be, when the first frost is going to be, how cold it's supposed to be, when are you supposed to plant your tomatoes out, this kind of thing. And if we make the wrong decisions on that, we're going to face a lot of increased crop failures and financial setbacks. So we're really using data to detect our soil moisture, to just to help us collect all of the data that we'll then make decisions based on instead of our memories. What else? We are also collaborating with other farmers in that are all local, but also have different soil types and microclimates. So we're building some redundancy in our crop plans by partnering with farmers that may be in sandier soils or clay soils or loam soils that may be on, you know, this side of the mountain range and the other side, so that, you know, if one of us experiences those north winds and have a crop loss on a crop unexpectedly early, maybe the other one on the other side isn't receiving that. So by collaborating with other farmers, and not only on crop production, but also on the acquisition of some of our fertilizers and things like that to help us decrease our costs on that overall. So yeah, collaboration overall is a really big part of what we're doing on the farm. We're also being really strategic about crop selection and timing. Some of the timing is facilitated by that data that I was alluding to, and crop selection has been shifting for us. For example, we've moved from sourcing a lot of our crops from seed farmers who reside in the Northeast US to the Southeast, because in the Southeast, because we've been getting warmer at times, and a lot of the crops that were developed for those types of microclimates mimic those more in the Southeast. So we're sort of shifting our seed sourcing and crop selection based on those things as well. So.
Yeah, thank you for the summary. That's very forward thinking, and I think there's a lot of data nerds like me listening to you describe data-driven decision making on your farm, which is exciting to hear about. And I think also we may have to do another webinar just hearing more about your climate resilience plan, because that seems like something we would love to learn more about. I also want to remind our audience too, because I know we're about 30 minutes in. If you guys have any questions for Emma, as you've been listening to this conversation, you can either type it directly in the chat. You can also put it in the Q&A. I know some of you might be on your cell phone, so one may be easier to get to than the other. So if you do add a question, I can give voice to that in a few minutes. So Emma, how do you see your work? We talked a little bit about food justice a little bit at the beginning, but how do you see your work at Moon Valley Farm contributing to the fight against systemic issues in our food system?
I want to loop back to collaborations. So besides collaborations with other farmers, we've been developing collaborations with nonprofit organizations and institutions, and just other organizations. I think that the short answer is that our food system is so deeply ingrained and has so much money tied to it, and that basically we can't fight it alone, especially as relatively small businesses. So we're going to need to tackle this together. A couple of the programs that I'm so excited to be a big part of over the past couple of years that we've developed is we're serving well over 1,000 families of PG County Title I elementary school students, giving them free, we're getting paid for these boxes, but they're getting this food for free as food as medicine boxes every month. We're collaborating with Johns Hopkins under a produce prescription program to similarly provide healthy, organic, local produce for individuals that are facing chronic diseases that could be prevented through a diet and lifestyle changes. We're working with the Judy Centers as well in Frederick County under a similar program. It's basically a food as medicine program as well. So I think one of the ways to help transform the food system is through collaborations to address equity, because my farm donated about $70,000 worth of produce in 2024, but we were able to actually 10x that impact by collaborating with programs that had funding to give us for producing that food, because farmers make small margins, we make small incomes compared to a lot of the careers that are available, and so we need to get paid for what we do, basically. And so these programs are helping us to get our food to people who don't have the financial capacity to get it, and really positively impact their lives. So that's one thing. And I also really think that we need to get this type of food, locally grown and procured food, into institutions in order to meet a lot more people. I have a 1,000-member CSA in a community where we have millions and millions of people. So it's a tiny drop in the bucket of the amount of food that's eaten on a daily basis that we're providing. So we started working with larger institutions like our school systems, and are now working with thousands of schools to provide them with local and organic food. And I think that's a huge part of shifting the food system in a more meaningful way than just serving essentially wealthier and more educated communities that can afford the capacity to be a part of a CSA program.
That's very creative, and I can see the emphasis on networking and collaborations and partnerships with other organizations to make that happen. But it sounds very exciting after a couple of weeks of just feeling very down about the state of things. It sounds exciting and transformative and empowering to local communities to hear you talk about the work that you guys are doing. I also, again, want to remind folks, you can always write a question in either the Q&A section or the chat. And I see, before I ask my last question, I see we have a question from Ben. In your experience, what are some of the factors that encourage or discourage your peers from adopting a CSA model?
Yeah, this is a complicated question in some ways, but some farmers that I know are discouraged because they don't want to fail the customers. And so this is a really fair sentiment, especially for new and beginning farmers, because the CSA model requires this massive amount of consistency and success as a grower, which can be really, really hard if you're new to growing. So in a lot of ways, I think the CSA model is best for more experienced farmers, even though I was a first generation, totally self-taught farmer who started a CSA year one. But my members were very generous and forgiving with me when I wasn't able to provide the diversity and selection that they would have preferred. So I think that's part of it. Not wanting to disappoint, and sometimes not wanting to produce some of the crops that CSA members really want. The thing that comes to mind first is broccoli. People love broccoli, and it's really hard to grow consistent, uniform broccoli for a profit in the Mid-Atlantic. It's just really expensive. It's a water hog. It doesn't like the heat. So when you grow it in the spring, you often sustain crop losses on it. And then when you grow it in the fall, if the temperatures don't cool down like this, which they often don't, it's more bumpy, and you'll experience these September heat waves, sometimes the broccoli protests and bolts. So there's some hesitancy for that crop selection and diversity and consistency that I know that CSA members need. Also, a lot of farmers don't like the handholding that's required to educate consumers on what seasonal eating is. Going back to broccoli, people want broccoli most weeks of the year, and in the Mid-Atlantic, it's just very, very hard, if not impossible, to grow that crop every week. And so we are facing a lot of weeks that customers are going to be facing crops that they haven't heard of before. They're going to get tomatillos in their box and they might not know what to do with it. And so there has to be a huge amount of customer service and an educational component that not all farmers feel they have the capacity to provide.
That makes sense. And I was going to say, I mean, I've never grown broccoli, so I didn't realize it was so finicky, but is it harder to grow cauliflower since that's often sometimes a substitute for broccoli?
Cauliflower is even more of a princess, I would say. It's much harder to grow perfect, especially organic. Cauliflower, that's one that we don't grow in the spring because of how much it hates the heat, and heading up in the early summer is very challenging to get a uniform crop on. So we just grow it in the fall. Cauliflower is also one of the most desirable crops for our pests. So many of our pests love cauliflower and broccoli just as much as we do. And so in an organic system, we either have to adhere to a really rigid spray schedule, which, organic farmers do spray as well. It's just they're organic approved sprays and they're way less effective, in short, than conventional alternatives. Or we have to utilize a really expensive exclusionary tactic like floating row cover or insect netting, that unfortunately also provides additional heat and opportunities for weed development. So they're also a little bit problematic as well as being expensive. So yeah.
That's very interesting, very fascinating to think about. So my next question actually is I'm going to integrate it with the question that we got from Ajani. So Ajani asked, what helped you prepare for starting your own business and what kind of people did you surround yourself with? And then my question was basically kind of like, what advice would you give those interested in starting their own sustainable farm or interested in doing a similar business themselves? So hopefully that makes sense. I'm kind of asking it all together.
Yeah. So, I have always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and I think that the sort of guts that came along with that definitely helps. And as well as a pure ignorance for the challenges that were lying ahead, allowed me some of the confidence to go forward. But I surrounded myself with a lot of mentors, and those have changed throughout the years. Some have been coaches, business coaches. Some have been for really particular aspects of the business. And I'll give some examples. So in the very beginning of my business, I was focused really on crop production and on making those sales. And I wasn't prepared for what building a business looked like on QuickBooks, for example, like how to build a chart of accounts, how to reconcile your books, anything like that, and developing systems around labor management were just, not top of mind in the beginning, and have been some of the most important parts of having a successful business. So in the beginning, I very volunteer fueled. Like today I have a staff of about 30. When in the beginning it was just me and my 2 kids under 2. So, and then some really nice volunteers. One of those volunteers had capacity and time available because he had just sold his business, and he was happy to weed in the fields and plant along with us, but he said, you know, I can really help you with the accounting or the books if you want. And so what developed from that is, for about 8 years, I traded him a CSA box for help doing my books. He taught me how to set up a chart of accounts. He helped me learn how to reconcile books, and figure out what to take a loan out for, what to crowdfund, how to get the resources that I needed. So that was really crucial. I've also had mentors in so many different types of things. In the beginning, I always used the barter system. I bartered for the use of land. I bartered for mechanical help. That was another one of those things that I was not taught growing up, but I realized I needed to fix my tractors, fix my trucks, and YouTube was okay, but I wanted to be a little bit faster. And so I had a mechanical mentor that, again, I traded vegetables for. As time went on, I've either used contractors to fill in the gaps of where my skill sets were or my capacity was. So I have I've partnered with a graphic designer to design the brand kit for the business. I've worked with a business coach to help me create a strategic plan for the growth of my business. So I have surrounded myself with so many different types of people that are experts and folks in with capacities that I don't have, capacities and skill sets that I don't have. And I highly recommend for new and beginning farmers or business owners in general to look for a model of, look for someone in your industry who is doing it and has not only the business that looks like what you think you want your business to be, but personally the lifestyle as well. So I'm looking to farmers who send their kids to college, who have health insurance, who take time off, who have employees who have been with them for a really long time. So I'm looking at different facets of their business and things that I really want in my own, and getting close to them and asking them to be my mentor.
Oh, I really appreciate that. I love that you use the barter system and pay your mentors in produce to help learn these skill sets. We need to bring that back. I mean, I love that. I would take you up on that if it means produce every week or every month. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. We have a question from Amy. She asks, do you save seeds from year to year or try to create more tolerant versions of your crops in order to address the impacts of things like climate change?
So we don't, because seed saving is a totally different style of farming. The quickest example is, in order to have preventative measures for disease and pest infestation, we basically put all of our pepper varieties together in the same block so that we don't grow peppers in the same spot year after year. And we do that with all of our crops. But in order to save seeds on peppers, you would want to put those peppers as far away from each other as possible to create a true next generation. So that's just really hard for us to do. But one thing that we do on our farm is we have an apiary. So we are keeping bees, and we are breeding queens that are both nice, that are able to fly in lower temperatures, because our springs have some of the best blooms for bees, but if they don't fly,
I think we might be having some
or
internet
California
issues.
or Hawaii, then they miss that opportunity for that early nectar flow that can really make or break the hive for the year. So that's a couple. We are very aware of that that opportunity to capitalize on our microclimate, but we're just really not able to do that for seed saving at this time.
Okay, and well, I'm excited to hear about your bee project as well. Let's see, we'll take one more question from Jackie. Jackie asks, what are some recommendations you may have for customers outside of participating in a CSA that could continue supporting a sustainable food model, supporting farmers, et cetera, in our own lives?
So it depends on you and what you do as a consumer, but I'll list a couple that come to mind. So if you are someone that has, say, a family and you are looking for activities to do with that family, look for farms that are engaging in agritourism. For example, my farm just launched our new date for our strawberry festival. So you can come to our farm and pick your own strawberries in May. So that's an opportunity to support farms with the same budget that you would use to, say, go to the movies or something like that. It's the same with if you're deciding to invest in something like an outdoor activity in the fall. Seek a farm that has pick your own apples, or that has a fall festival, or a corn maze, or maybe even a sunflower maze. I'm actually planning to try to do a sunflower maze on my farm in the future because I love sunflowers. So considering buying bedding plants or plants for your house inside from local farmers instead of from the big box stores that are not local. So seeking out independent and smaller operations for those needs. Same with any, like if you have a yard and a house, if you are getting local, if you're mulching, try to find local mulch sources or local compost facilities that are supporting local farmers, and really closing the loop on the waste system that we have in Maryland. So what are we doing with all of the compostables, and seeking those businesses that are dealing with that. So there's a lot more ways than shifting some of your food budget to local food growers, but that's a huge one. But there's so many other ways too, and just consider some of the value-added products that farmers are making as well. That's a huge topic. I'm actually, in a few minutes, I'm going to serve on the Maryland Agriculture Commission and on our value-added agriculture committee, talking about how value-add agriculture can really lead to financial profitability on small operations, but we need people to buy it. We need people to buy the jams and jellies, the honeys, the maple syrups that we're producing. And so yeah, that's a couple ways there.
Those are all really good recommendations, and I'm hoping that after listening to this webinar, some folks will be checking out, if they don't already participate in CSA produce or some of these other things in terms of like supporting local growers. I think we've definitely, pardon the pun, but planted that seed for that to take place. And I'd like to thank you, Emma, really for joining us today, and this really exciting conversation because it's right up our alley. I know we have a lot of folks in our program that are very interested in growing things and food and making things more sustainable. So I appreciate your time. I also want to thank Taylor, who's been in the background letting folks in when they join the meeting. So thank you, everyone. I will send out an email tomorrow with the recording in case anyone missed it or joined late. And if you feel like you want to, you can post a thank you or virtual applause in the chat since we are on a webinar format. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.